Hello, everyone. I am Oita Coleman, project lead of the Open Voice Trustmark Initiative, an independent project of the LFAI and Data Foundation, and moderator of today's webinar. Before we begin, let's handle a few housekeeping items. This webinar is governed by the Linux Foundation antitrust policy and is being recorded. It has started on time and it will end on time. And as we go through the webinar, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A and we'll address them at the end. And also feel free to use the chat during the session to share any insights or thoughts you may have from our panelists. So let's begin. Worthy of trust, the founding vision of the Open Voice Network and North Star of the Open Voice Trustmark Initiative. Our charter is to establish a framework of trustworthy AI principles, education courses, best practices, white papers, and tools to deliver on that vision. Based on the solid foundation of the trustworthy AI principles of privacy, transparency, accountability, inclusivity, sustainability, and compliance. In today's webinar, we will be highlighting the principles of privacy and security, transparency and accountability, as well as compliance and governance needed to navigate how enterprises are integrating conversational AI and generative AI technologies into their workforce, businesses, processes, and technologies. And joining me in this fireside chat today are Doug Rogers, who is Chief Security Officer at Wegmans Food Markets. Pete Bigley, Head of Enterprise Architecture at Adobe. And Carrie Briggs, Generative AI Consultant. I'm happy to have these three unique perspectives today. We have a security leader for a major retailer, an enterprise leader for industry standard products for personalized digital experiences, and a leader who consults on cloud-based and software as a services solutions. In addition to bringing their subject matter expertise, they have been staunch supporters of the Open Voice Network from its beginnings and continue to support our efforts at the Trustmark Initiative. And personally, for me, they have been trusted advisors for which I am extremely grateful. So to set the context for today's discussion, I've asked each panelist to share their perspective on the questions before us. What are the key challenges enterprises face in integrating conversational AI and generative AI technologies into their operations? Let's start with Doug Rogers. Doug.
Good morning, Oita.
Good morning.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for pulling us all together. Very nice time. Challenges, I'll start out with challenges from a retailer perspective. Our biggest thing is protecting customer and employee personal information and trying to make sure that that never gets exposed through any means, but certainly now through AI and large language models. We want to protect our proprietary information to make sure that they're not added to LLMs and have that very sensitive business related information become part of the public domain. And then for me, the last challenge is really educating users that with generative AI comes great content that comes back, but it's really got to be fact checked. You got to make sure that the information that you're getting and then going to use in the business environment is accurate as you would expect.
Thank you. as you touched on, the protection, data protection, which speaks to privacy and security considerations, which is right within your realm as chief security officer, and the education, which is key to what we do here, and just so important that, as you say, not just your employees, but also the your customers as well. Pete, let's hear your thoughts.
Sure, thank you. So trying not to repeat what Doug covered, looking at the challenges from an enterprise architecture perspective, the first thing I would say is this is a very immature space, right? There's a lot of new technologies being deployed. There's some technologies that have been around for a while, but when it comes to generative and to a degree voice, this is a new space. So you've got use case specific solutions coming to market. There's a lot of different complexities there. There's kind of no one size fits all. And then everyone's kind of got this Gen AI extension to their core product coming out, whether there's much to it or not, which leads to additional confusion in the marketplace. The regulation is coming, but it's late. From a privacy, data, and authenticity risk perspective, these are all topics that are top end right now, as Doug was alluding. And then maybe last but not least, with everything going on and the business wanting to have an appreciation for where this plays, how do you fund all this experimentation and make sure that it's done in a way that is ethical and observant of privacy and data and authenticity considerations?
Great. Thank you. Look forward to touching on that and hearing from that. So, Carrie, let's hear from you.
With the conversational AI and generative AI, conversational has been becoming more mainstream in a lot of industries. Generative has really sprung on the public over the last 12 or 18 months. And I look at them as a continuum of the digital transformation that's been happening over the last, say, 25 years. And so a lot of this is about automating human tasks. And so even though these are discretely interesting technologies and they're evolving rapidly and becoming much more broadly used, it's really a continuous process that companies are adapting to, the public's adapting to, process automation is adapting to. So I kind of look at generative AI in particular is a means to increase and rapidly increase the process automation across a lot of different industries. And so right now, I think the leading areas that this is happening in is customer service. We see chatbots and other types of communication uses. Productivity is being enhanced in terms of individual as well as corporate, office business, and just general business processes. Content generation is being accelerated in many ways, from business to personal to educational use cases. And all this really will lead to more optimization of the human activities that can be automated through things like generative AI. So that I think that's kind of an overview of the things I see going on, if that makes sense to you folks.
It does, and thank you for tying it into talking about just a continuation of digital transformation, because we know as each technology phase that we go through is how do we as and part of that is how do you integrate these into your existing workforce, your businesses, your processes, your technologies? Doug, let's start with you as you're at Wegmans. How as you evaluating how to integrate these technologies within, internally, because you have to look at it from that perspective of your employees, and as you mentioned, how they use the technology and making sure that your brand reputation, intellectual property isn't exposed, but then also your customer perspective, where in terms of their data being protected. So can you share your thoughts on how do we, what, how do we address those? What's at stake in terms of those topics?
Sure. What's at stake is the huge productivity gains that you would get by allowing the masses to use that type of technology. But more on the negative side on the stake is really the highly impactful exposure of intellectual property. The security side of Doug wants to shut it down, stop it, block it, don't let it happen, because I'm not sure that a developer that wants to move faster and create really good test code for his program didn't put in database credentials, database schema information, anything that could be leveraged by the bad guy that's always out there to come and attack Wegmans. So my knee-jerk reaction is to shut it down, but that's not really necessarily the right thing to do. Immediately get out there and educate folks that whatever you put into the model in your request is public domain and it's going to be out there forever. So that's the first thing that you want to do. The second thing was work with leadership on our side to say, let's take a methodical approach and maybe do a pilot. And so we did. We went and started a pilot with the Microsoft Copilot product and going through that process. So, as soon as something's available, it becomes the Wild West. Now we're trying to rein it in and give our users a path using the Microsoft tool that we started with that does protect the data and allows us to put information in, but doesn't pass that data onto the large language model. It stays within our four walls. So it's a little bit of best of both worlds. So try and put a little bit of security spin on it, but still give our users the ability to leverage the tool and get some of those productivity gains.
And so you touched on the the knee jerk would say no. Security officer Doug says no, that's not. Yeah, we're not ready to go there. But you touched on the need to cautiously or have some parameters around how do you integrate it. And Carrie, you spoke on the importance of funding experimentation. So how do you see that? And from your experience as you worked with different enterprises, organizations, as they integrate this within their organizations, what kinds of things have you seen in terms of the experimentation?
I think that I've seen mostly siloed activities that aren't really holistic views across the multiple use cases that are evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think some of the leadership, certainly IT leadership, security leadership, C-suite, they need to be looking at all the different places this will touch. The experimentation will be in a finite manner, for certain use cases, obviously, but thinking about how this really impacts the company broadly, I think is a good thing to be thinking about now as you're starting your experimentation and trying, various use cases. But again, there's such a wide application for these tools because it really touches, customer experience, obviously, but the financial part of the company, analytics, what do you do with all this data? You're generating huge amounts of data. How do you actually assess and use that data somehow proactively and effectively? But it also touches things like logistics and supply chain. And so the process efficiencies that are going to be gained will be enormous. So I think a lot of those things really aren't customer facing, but that's where there'll be very big impacts where, just like in logistics, you think in the grocery markets, how they're doing their supplies, it's such a complex thing. If they can get some percentage of improvement over time, that's really big for the entire industry. And you could repeat that through retail, energy, defense, lots of different services and product companies. So I think really leadership should be thinking about the broader view of where these can apply and have the best impact in the near term, right? Some are much longer term as behavior has to change along with processes. But I think that's one of the things everybody could be thinking about.
Yeah. So Pete, as you're representing tools that are used within enterprises and used by creatives, and as more tools are integrating these technologies from an Adobe standpoint, you have spoken about, what's at stake, wanting to advance the products and integrate this, but how the strategies or considerations that are internally, the conversations to determine how do you move forward? What are the trade-offs that you're discussing? So could you speak to what's happening within Adobe as you approach this?
So as you were suggesting, we have products that are in market today that would fall into the Gen AI classification for content creation and so forth. And so we're very interested in making sure that privacy concerns are addressed, that content authenticity is addressed. And so as you're aware, we're a part of the Content Authenticity Initiative and C2PA as ways of trying to drive standards to protect privacy and protect authenticity. One of the things that we found early on was we have employees that have the same concerns as our customers about these technologies. And so it was really paramount that we get out early and educate our employees on these tools and what works and what doesn't and what to stay away from, in part for their understanding and in part to help with the overall governance within our own organization. And so I would say there's a couple of things for people that are just getting started in this arena. And the first one is an education program for your internal employees. Make sure that they understand what the challenges and what's at stake. And the fast follow to that is governance. So you want to get to a point where you've got the ability to support hackathons and innovation jams and all the fun and innovation that can come out of that. You need the governance there first, so that we are controlling what it is we're experimenting with. And I think we've done a good job in that arena. This is both we get privacy and legal and security involved up front in understanding the use cases, and this is done use case by use case. So that you have an understanding of what's allowed and what's not, and whose models are we using, and do they get to have our data? Are we keeping our data? All those kind of questions get answered through that process. And then I'd say there's probably also a time to market consideration here that because we're in the product business, so we have to take into account. And so sometimes, our preference often is to write our own, right? But sometimes in this area where the technology is so new and evolving, you don't have the engineering time to actually engineer a complete platform. And so in the buy versus build discussion here, sometimes it's better to stand up a pilot using a third-party tool, similar to what Doug was describing, right? Where you're looking at office productivity, or you're looking at engineering tools and saying, yeah, we'll bring those in from a partner and see how that has impact on the employee base before we consider doing kind of a write your own version.
So on the question of build versus buy and time to market, Carrie, you work with some startups, correct? Could you share some of the conversations that you're having with them on this build versus buy, the time to market, the experimentation, but making sure that all of the ethical considerations are top of mind as they move forward with the product development? Could you speak to what you're seeing and hearing in those spaces?
Yeah, I think that's a great consideration always. I'm a little bit biased because I think IT folks, I respect them greatly, and they're often brilliant engineers. They generally believe that they can build something well, and as well as other teams. So you have kind of a push-pull thing going on in companies always, where some people want to get to market faster. They find vendors that have good tools, or they believe they're good tools, and they may not be the best people to make that decision, but they have their opinions. And then you have the IT and the technical guys that are really expert in many ways in terms of building these types of things, especially to the particular industry they're in, where they know the bits and pieces and nuances that really have to be addressed. So that gets into requirements and all sorts of things. That assessment period can be a long time too, not just the actual design and build. And so if they have a long-term plan and they don't have a sense of urgency, yeah, if you got great teams and they have the bandwidth to do that and the skill sets, then go for it. But a lot of people don't. They're in industries where they're not really as technical, or their technical people are focused in other kinds of ways, not so much product building or solution building, but more maybe maintenance and support type roles. So I think it's going to be an individual decision based on the criteria and the sense of urgency they need, and the complexity of the tasks they're trying to employ, and how does their skill set match with those tasks. So I would say it's always going to be an individual consideration for companies. I also say that small companies can never, in my way, I mean, they can compete with new ideas and creativity and new use cases. But when you've got the Microsofts and Googles and Amazons of the world, Adobe, which is a great company, I've respected for 30 years, you just don't have that kind of strength and firepower, right? You don't have the depth. And so small companies can focus on individual solutions and then grow a market and maybe expand their services. Whereas the large guys, they just got resources that are unlimited, and their funding can be 100x or more of smaller companies. So I mean, all those factors come into play, but the right answer is really dependent on the circumstances of the individual companies, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Arita, for
No,
jumping
go
in.
ahead, please.
Completely agree.
Let open discussion with the three of you. Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree with, Pete said it and Carrie kind of reiterated it. We're a grocery retailer, and our job is to give the customer a service they can't get anywhere else. And that's not generative AI. And we just don't have the resources to be able to build our own and tinker with that kind of thing. So that's why we had to pick a partner. And that's exactly why we did what we did, is pick a partner that we can trust and that is going to get us that time to learn in a very cost-effective way. We just couldn't have possibly built it ourselves. So that's exactly why we do it. We have our developers focusing on stuff that can differentiate Wegmans from every other retailer. And again, this is that space that we're not going to be able to differentiate. So we'll pick a partner.
Yeah. And in terms of some of that work, in terms of misinformation and disinformation, and we saw in recently in the news, and I think, Pete, this is something probably that's very top of mind within Adobe, is that content authentic, authenticity. And as you kind of spoke on the work with that you're doing related to that, in some of our meetings, one of the things that you often speak or talk about is making sure there's still human in the loop. That could you speak to that? Your thoughts of within this, where we are, how do we? What's the importance of having human in the loop, and how do you integrate that?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. So knowing that these technologies will not always 100% of the time produce the answer that we're looking to put in front of our best customers. Many of the engagements that we've had and the policies around that have said that we'll have a human in the loop. So we'll have a support desk that's taking a customer call, the bot is assisting our employee in helping the customer, not directly talking to the customer, as an example. Okay. I believe eventually we'll get to a point where that trust level will go up. There's technologies such as the RAG model and so forth, which will allow us to say, here's the top answer. But just the fact that, with 5 nines reliability, I can't state that the answer that's given to my best customer is always the right one. The reputational risk, if nothing else, is too high to allow open access between our generative AI engines and customers directly.
So on that point, the liability. One thing, Carrie, you have talked about is related to especially the data layer and the liability, especially in the cloud or software as a service environments. Speak to where the grayness exists within that in terms of liability in large language models.
Yeah, that's a very serious topic. And I do work with a group right now that's very deeply into that space. So I'm getting educated, as we all are. If you look at how the training models are built, that's the black box words we hear, right? They're not transparent. We have no idea really what's going on within these systems. And governments are asking for more transparency through guidance. And there's a lot of governance. There's a lot of documents being generated around the world, Europe in particular, and the United States, and all over the world, in fact. So governments are trying to get a handle on this because it is a new thing, and it does have dangers. It is not all just happiness, because there's bad actors out there. And if you talk about the main 3 threats are adversarial threats, intentional malicious acts, which we see hackers and ransomware frequently, and they're demanding millions of dollars and they're getting paid, which is even crazier. But they have to, because they threaten exposing their data and giving more risk. But the other 2 things really are the deep fakes and the cloning. We're going to see a lot more of that. And now that generative AI is also moving into voice, video, creative images, not just text. So kind of that whole barrage of media is going to have a lot of fake things happening. The political season coming up, we're going to see a lot of that. And all around the world, it's already happening. But the other is data poisoning. And I think that's probably the most dangerous, because in the foundational training models, if you have people that are injecting false data or some other, bad data, whatever it is, malicious or incorrect or defamatory, it could be bias. I mean, a lot of things that can then move out into the LLMs and into the cloud environments and then be spread around the world virtually instantaneously. I mean, it depends on the sources you're hitting and how widely they're distributed. But those are the things that I know the cloud security people, and Doug, I think you'd agree, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Those are the real threats, that the LLMs, there's not really any protection layer. They're not legally bound to, the cloud people are not legally bound to assure what that data is going through them is safe or accurate. And so the cloud guys provide the channel, but they don't really have the threat protections. It's the applications that these threats come up through. So that's a reality. And there are a lot of people working on that. But right now, there's not a lot of protection. And the hackers are just as well-funded and intelligent and trained as any of the defenders. So everybody needs to be aware of that and conscious of it, from the individual desktop all the way through the large data centers. And I think more and more people will be learning that the hard way, unfortunately.
Carrie, you are so right. I saw just in this past week or the week before that ChatGPT is going to use Reddit data to train its model. And my question is, how are you going to take extremely subjective data, put it into a model, and what are you going to use it for? Talk about people's comments. They're their comments. They're not necessarily fact. And you're absolutely right that going forward, we're only going to be in a situation where it's going to be more and more difficult. I told my teenagers 5 years ago, the hardest job for them is going to be able to take information that they're getting out of now generative AI and understand what's true and what's not, what's a fact and what's not. Back when I was a teenager, there was this thing called TV, and you had news reporters on TV, and literally they really couldn't say anything on TV that wasn't true. And when it was written in the newspaper, you were pretty satisfied that it was an accurate statement, obviously, depending on the newspaper. Now, 30 years later, 40 years later, it's completely different. And being able to understand what is truth coming out of these LLMs is going to be a daunting task. And again, that's,
I think it's also about the scale. Yeah, Doug, it's not just the truthfulness, it's a scale. Because with automated systems and the intelligent agents that are being created, you know, we think kind of one-to-one. We've all grown up in a one-to-one communication environment, one-to-many, you know, with mass media. But like you say, we thought the TV and newspapers were accurate. The falsehoods can now be broadcast out across millions of people instantly, and so that scale, it's, you know, a lot of people really don't think in terms of that kind of scale. But the reality is somebody in South Africa or Indonesia could be watching this and just as easily as we are. And so the way data is transmitted now so universally and so quickly, you know, we've seen all sorts of crazy stories come out of the social media, the scale and everything else. One of the things I think will help improve or at least combat that is now the emergence of small language models. And it's certainly with the companies that are building their own internal domains and being very conscious of not mixing their proprietary and very valuable data into those large language models. So you see companies now that are very consciously limiting their employee access to these tools. Others are still wide open, and it's a Wild West thing. But more and more companies are moving toward smaller language models that they can control those domains and retain that authenticity and accuracy, which everybody can assume but may not assume correctly.
Yeah. So,
and Carrie, just as a sidebar, an additional risk that we've seen, look at all the freemium and freeware that's available to put co-pilots onto your collaboration, your office collaboration tools. It's really interesting how we feel like we've had to really clamp down on software downloads and so forth, much more so as a result of just the ability to add that co-pilot functionality onto my Outlook.
so why could you elaborate on that, Pete?
So what's happening is in the freemium world, our employees are being enticed to download a tool that's going to be a plugin to Outlook, and accept the terms and conditions with an engineering mindset rather than a procurement mindset, which can then lock you into some type of renewal that says that I now have financial obligations, number one. Number two, and maybe more importantly, we don't know what's happening with the data that this plugin sees and can direct it around.
Yeah, I think that's a huge problem. And I just recently was hit by one of those. I was going to sign up for a monthly service, and their system automatically hit me for the 12 months. You know, it's those kind of things. And that's been going on a pretty long time with social media and other direct marketing tactics. But political fundraising's that way. You hear about those things too. But people need to be very wary. And like nobody reads the 25-page Google agreement you sign up for. Yet you basically sign away your rights to everything you're using over Google. So everyone needs to really be aware of that and be careful about what they're agreeing to that looks free or maybe enticing in a little 20-second video. Yeah. Buyer beware for sure.
Yeah, and that also means that at that point, it's not just their personal data, but it's any organizational data as well that could be exposed. That if you don't read the terms and conditions and the considerations, I think
I can't. Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many applications we find where somebody downloaded an app onto their phone that says, I just need access to your calendar. So will you give me access? The user says yes. And then you find out that not only do you give access to the calendar, you're giving access to everything that's on your phone. So all of that corporate data in your email box is also being exposed to that new app that does, I don't know, anything, whatever.
Yeah, and it's an app that most people don't use. They'll download it once and play with it twice, and yeah, just
all
leave
your
it sit
data
for
is being siphoned
yeah.
off. Exactly.
Yeah, I recommend never accepting those terms from anybody ever, giving access to your phone and all your either say Google contact lists. I would never ever voluntarily give that stuff up. It's a competitive advantage. It's also just a privacy and security issue. And speaking about the liability and security, I know we had talked earlier, a week or so ago about that. And one of the things that's really changing is that laws have been enacted in the United States that is now putting liability on the leadership of major companies when there's data leaks or hacks. And so that's changing some of the, I think, viewpoints and temperament. When a CEO or CFO can have liability for major loss of personal data, that should change behaviors, and which that should lead to, and we've talked about this as a group, is increased funding for security, because large companies will spend billions of dollars on marketing, say a Procter and Gamble or an automotive company like Toyota or GM, yet they are spending, single millions or low tens of millions on security. And that's a real imbalance. I'm an advocate for spending a lot more on security now because of the generative AI threats and the misuse of these tools intentionally, which is really exponentially growing. And that's one of the things I'm really gaining more insights into because of some of the folks I'm working with in that space. That we are just seeing the tip of the iceberg of malicious activities, and they can be just an individual hacker, or it can be state sponsored major issues. So again, just when your chief security officer or others, as the CIOs maybe, are encouraging your teams to be careful and really don't open spammy emails and all the kinds of things that are going on an almost daily basis, everybody really needs to take that at heart, because again, like you say, you give them access to your emails, your contact list, all of a sudden they've got, in my case, 1,000 names and people that didn't agree to be exposed.
PSA: don't click links and never put your user ID and password from an email clicking on a link. Don't ever do it.
All
Yeah,
right.
good advice.
So we know that there are so many strategies that in place in terms of path forward, and we want to make sure we leave enough time for addressing questions. And we touched on some of the things in terms of path forward strategies is educate. You giving some advice relative to security, risk mitigation strategies, and we can share more about that. But I just want to jump on. There was one question about for build your own, what are advantages to open source components or APIs to vendors? So would like to have thoughts on that. Carrie or Pete, would you like to address that?
Pete, you got some ideas on that one?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but where I think this question is going is, to what extent are you going to use adopt open source and embed it in your own system?
Yes.
And I would say it really depends upon whether are you trying to differentiate and you need that logic, or are you okay using commonly accessible? I would always err on the side of taking advantage of something that already exists if it's good enough. But where I need to differentiate, I'm probably going to take the code and exploit it myself.
And in terms of the startups that you're working with, Carrie, would you say that they where's the split between those who are using open source or those who are writing proprietary? What are you seeing?
I think smaller companies are very pro open source because it saves them time and effort and money. And again, speed to market, because if you've got venture capital funding your company, there's always time constraints and limits to the money you have available if you're pre-revenue, which a lot of people I know and have worked with are that case, right? So So you're always kind of trying to beat the clock and rush things through. But what really suffers is things like testing and security. I mean, the two things that really need to be done the most. And I think that's where a lot of the failures occur, because they've rushed, and all due respect to IT teams, but if they say something's going to take 6 months, it sometimes takes twice that long. And that's just the reality of developing new products. But because of that, the testing cycles get shrunk, and sometimes down to almost no testing, or they've kind of tested as they went. And so there's flaws that emerge, and those flaws bring risks. So
So
again, people, right, if that answers your question,
So-
I didn't pay Carrie to say that. And those of you who know my background is in quality, software quality and testing. I did not pay Carrie to say that at all. So, but thank you. I appreciate it. It's just,
But it is
warms
so
my
true.
heart to hear that.
We've all seen it. I mean, even
Yeah.
in the very largest, best companies, people are pushing against the clock and the budgets and management and everything. And one thing I think we can't lose sight of, and I think, Doug, you were talking about the human first.
Yeah.
There's a number of companies right now that are automating sales process, and I'm kind of a biz dev guy. You guys know that. So I think there's going to be some real turmoil in that space, because things like selling is a very human. I mean, there's widgets you can sell and you're just ordering, paper products or something. But in consultative sales, where you really have to share ideas and explore and be creative and imagine new solutions, that's a human thing. And these systems really aren't creative yet. They can make beautiful pictures and videos and things, but they're not the originator of the ideas and the creative force behind these things. That's human, and it comes through sharing ideas and interaction and association with other things. And so I think those things we don't want to lose sight of. I mean, you can automate an email, yeah, those are easy, but now college students are doing their thesis using generative AI. I mean, I don't know if that's good or not, but things like selling are still very human. You can automate to some point, or you can see pattern recognition, but if you're looking at transcripts at every single sales call or every single customer service call, I don't know how much real learning happens there, because people are habitual and behaviors are pretty universal across personas. And the really smart, both psychology and marketing people know those things. So I think people are very predictable. And so if you understand those patterns and those behaviors, it's not that hard to sell or market to those types of people, right? Again, it's a very human element, but our ability to judge people and truthfulness, trustworthiness, these are the things that can't really be automated. They can kind of test the theories, but it still comes down to human interaction.
And so on that,
wait, hold on one
yeah,
second.
I was
Sorry.
going to say, Doug,
I was trying to get in
Doug,
there.
I was going to, yes, I
Thanks.
really was hoping to hear from you. Exactly.
Yeah, going back to the open source thing, it's very time consuming and costly to write your own code. And so this open source thing came out, and it's great. Everybody collaborates. You go to one location and pull in that code, and it proliferates throughout the globe. Well, guess what? The bad guys know that. And the bad guys know that I don't have to attack Wegmans to figure out their code, to break into their code to do something bad. I can go into these open source libraries and plant malicious code that looks very normal. And unless you know what the code is doing, that code could be entered into this open source library and distributed across the globe. Anybody that uses that open source library instantly. So just remember, the bad guys know it. They're leveraging that capability to get their code embedded into your application, and then it's sitting there dormant waiting for them to attack. So again, testing is super important, and knowing what the code is doing for that function is super critical.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question, what is one thing that, what one thing can an enterprise or organization do this week to push forward AI in a human-centric way? Thoughts on that? and I don't know how this could tie into the three of you have all said educate, educate, educate.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go to. I hate to use the same answer, but the very first thing I would do is educate the users as to what the tool does and how to use it in a safe way that you're not giving away, or at least you understand what you're putting into the request so that you can think about it and say, hey, do I really want to put that information into the LLM? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you can get to a situation where you can control the data that is going into the model and keep it in your four walls, I would highly recommend that versus the option of just going out to Chat GPT and giving the keys to the kingdom away.
So
And what I
Pete,
would add on to what Doug said
yes.
is following the education is get that governance in place so that ideas can come in and you can execute on them in confined ways very quickly so that people don't get frustrated by it. So the one topic that I haven't heard us touch on much of it all is actually data quality.
Yes.
And just as a pro tip, I would say that while that's not something that always comes up in Gen AI conversations, the cleaner and more well understood your data is, the faster these initiatives tend to take off, right? If you're dealing with data sources that are really ugly and so forth, you can have algorithms try and figure things out, but you're sending them all over the place. So the cleaner your data source, especially your internal ones, your metadata and so forth, the cleaner that is, the paybacks can be significant in terms of time to market.
Very good. So there's a question here about C2PA. Will C2PA continue to work on security watermarks for voice, in particular, individual voice for hands-free access or voice biomarker?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I would reach out to them directly for their roadmap. But yes, that is my understanding is that voice is a big part of that.
All right. So one of the other things that I can say in terms of one thing is as was pointed out in chat, we have the Trustmark initiative has a training course on the ethical considerations. So please look for that training course, and that is one way that within your organization you can, we have the tools, and we'll have additional courses, one on generative AI in terms of the ethical considerations there, as well as a course on risk mitigation strategies that's coming out. So we look forward to those courses being introduced, let's say by Q3. So we're looking forward to that. So we can, I think I know we're at time, so we want to be respectful of your time. We have, again, lots of opportunities just like this that we've had this discussion today. We have this discussion at the privacy and security work group meetings on Tuesdays, the first and third Tuesdays of every month. And this is, if you found this conversation interesting, and you would like to continue a master class in hearing from subject matter experts and trusted advisors, this is really the benefit of having people who can bring you information and share their thoughts. And if you would like more information on anything related to our work or questions for that you would like to follow up from any of the panelists, or we will be happy to share that with you. The QR code has a form. Just feel free to submit your questions, or and we'll be glad to continue the dialogue. Again, really thank those of you who attended our webinar today. Again, thank the panelists, Doug, Pete, Carrie. Thank you for your time, and again, always appreciative of your support of our work. So Any final thoughts from either of you? I give you one. We give you 30 seconds to follow up. Start with Carrie, and then Doug, and then Pete. 30 seconds.
Well, I thank you, Oida. It's always a pleasure. My last parting shot would be everybody needs to be proactive and not reactive, because once the damage is done, trying to fix it is a lot harder than trying to prevent it.
All right, Doug.
Yes, thank you, Oid. Again, thank you for the opportunity. Had a really good time here. Just remember, there's always a bad guy out there, and the bad guys are smarter than we are. There's always going to be somebody smarter than us, and they're going to take advantage of that to try and do us harm. And you got to stay 2 steps ahead. You don't want to be the slowest person running from the bear. You want to be 1 step ahead of the next guy so that they go and attack somebody else instead of coming after Wegmans. And that's our job, to not make Wegmans the target. So thank you all.
All right. Stay ahead. 1 step. Yes. And Pete.
And again, this has been a real pleasure. So thank you for the invitation and the ability to kind of learn from this forum. And I would say, yeah, proactive. All 3 of us are going to vote that way. You need to be out in front for competitive reasons. You need to be out in front for privacy and risk and all the things we've talked about today.
All right. Thank you so much. And until next time, we will sign off on our webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Oida.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.